All right. Well, I think we'll have, as I said, Jess and perhaps one or two others will join a little bit later. But we have a lot of really exciting developments to share. Number one, we've completed a first year and things are really coming together from my standpoint on all fronts. It's always a little bit of walking in the dark when you're involved in a startup effort that's national, which we're of course leading. But for my part, our team, our discipline working group, our stakeholders have all really come together to rally behind this effort, which is important. And this is probably the most excited I've been about this effort. I was excited when we started, and I am now exceeding my own expectations. So, Tom, did you want to go ahead and maybe begin by just talking about some of our developments over the last couple months, and welcoming everybody, talking about TRB and our focus on transformational technologies, and then moving into our work.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm not for safety reasons, I'm not seeing the screen in front of me, but I do want to thank everybody for being on board, for staying with us through the first year. As Tyler said, we're going to be talking today about some exciting developments with the demo. But in the meantime, we've been busy working on our first set of deliverables and activities, which you're going to be hearing more about in a little bit. Recap. You provided some input, some critical input onto the development of the survey question. You helped us narrow the set of occupations and competencies that we focused on in the survey, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. We have developed a model career pathway for transportation planning, which has been mirrored by similar pathways in the other 4 regions of the U.S. that are looking at different disciplines within transportation. We took the lead in helping define the notion of transformational technology and what it means, and how it relates to disruptive technologies and sort of more creative destruction, and how that impacts transportation as a whole. And we've actually, I think, created an interesting way to look at transformational technology and what it means for the discipline as it currently stands, and what it means for the future workforce. And a lot of this came together at a session that the National Network for the Transportation Workforce co-hosted with the Education and Training Committee of TRB in Washington during the annual meeting, where we had a really good discussion about the dramatic shift in workforce needs for transportation as a whole, framed by this discussion of transformational technology. So that's sort of by way of set up some of the things we want to cover, I think, probably in the next 25 minutes or so before we move on to the demo. Tyler, did I miss anything? That's my recollection from looking at this slide.
That's a nice overview, Tom. Maybe we could just go ahead and talk a little bit about the workshop. I think, as you said, that really helped us bring a lot together. Terry, Bill's Honor Discipline Working Group on today's webinar was part of that. So Terry, if you have thoughts, we welcome that as well. For my part, number one, we had a great turnout at TRB on a Thursday morning, which is typically the worst time to do a session, and we packed the room, which is evidence that there's interest in what we're doing. There was a great representation of stakeholders from industry and departments of transportation and some young professionals giving input. It was a very spirited discussion after 3 great presentations. Tom, Scott, Terry.
Tyler, I'd also add, we also had some European representation as well, which is some relationships that we're trying to cultivate. So I think that's worth mentioning.
Yes, absolutely. So what we found was, I think, I think, a validation of our work on identifying transformational technologies, which we'll talk more about later in detail, and also touch on how we validated that with our survey. One of the things I found in the feedback in the room was that there is this built-in assumption that as we head into the future, we read these articles that technology will somehow take the human element out, almost this ghost in the machine. And there's this assumption built in sometimes that we don't need to, the technology will take care of everything. But what was very clear to me in moderating part of the session, in just getting feedback in the room, was that in order to address transformational technologies and the skills gaps created, there's workforce development innovations are needed. Human resources innovations are needed. It's very much a people solution to technology problems and disruption. Scott, Terry, any thoughts on the session?
No, I agree. I thought it went very well. As you say, the room was packed, and I would sort of re-emphasize the notion people are still going to be a fundamental part, in some ways an even more critical part of transportation in the future. I think it's just going to require different skill sets, and obviously that's what this whole initiative is really focused on. How do we identify those? Really, how do we help develop those training and those skill sets for the future of transportation?
Agreed. Scott, did you want to add anything else, or are we, or Tom, or are we at this point maybe good to move?
Right, because I was out in the audience, so from my perspective, I think what I liked was the audience was very engaged in how technology is affecting this sector. But I was more impressed with the fact that we got a lot of workforce participants to show up. And to me, that affirms that there's an interest in understanding how these changes are affecting the workforce. So I think we're right on course.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is that Volpe reached out to me after the workshop, the Volpe Center, which is the division of USDOT that's based in Cambridge, Mass, to talk further about how the issues that were highlighted in the workshop and the work that we're doing with the career pathway and with all of the national network for the transportation workforce could be better and more strategically aligned with what Volpe is doing from a research perspective. So I took that as a positive that we struck a chord with a key partner. And I had a follow-up meeting since then, and we're going to continue that discussion.
Yeah, so very clearly a positive session, and I think affirming of our work over all of 2017, and really setting us up nicely for what we're doing this year. Scott, would you like to talk about our work on transformational technologies? You were really critical in just bringing some structure and I think a thoughtful approach to this.
Yeah, sure. And by no small effort, this is not an easy subject to tackle from a workforce perspective. So what I did in conjunction with Tyler's team is we effectively did a literature scan to kind of see, using a lot of the predominant sources out there for projecting what transportation effects are happening in the transportation industry, and looking at and trying to really collate all of that data together into a sensible and understandable matrix. And then we laid that out for the 5 regional centers so that they could not only look at a common set of technologies, but also apply them to each of their transportation disciplines. So we have operations, safety, engineering, environment, and of course planning in the Southwest, to kind of get each of the centers to focus on how is your discipline working group advising that these technologies are impacting the workforce sort of now and as they see it down the road. And very thoughtful feedback and very useful feedback from the directors and their discipline working groups, and that's helped to flesh out what is a work in progress. And I think we've got some more good work to do in this area, and certainly the survey results, which Tyler will be talking about, will help to infuse this with a wider national perspective, which I'm excited to see. But this is sort of a summary on the left-hand side of the slide of the, and not necessarily in connected reasons, just laid out in a way to get them all on the slide. These are sort of the top technologies that surfaced as being transformative in transportation. And then we tried to identify just the top impacts on planners. And most of this came from Tom and his experience. So we would absolutely love if anybody has any suggestions or feedback on how these technologies, and I know we've discussed this a number of times, so we'll just continue to work on this. A good deal or a good summary of this is in the final report. And right now, the areas we're looking at and how we're seeing the impacts affecting planners. But again, the truth is, in forecasting this stuff, it's just, there are no easy answers. And so it's very, very much a research survey. Yeah, and I look forward to any feedback that you guys have.
All right. Well, Tom, do you have anything you want to add, or I realize we have a lot to cover in a finite amount of time, so I'm going to move forward if you're okay with that.
No, we might want to add that how we're going to use this piece sort of to frame in part the final report, to sort of give us some sense of how we translate findings across the five disciplines. So this was not just sort of an exercise for us, but I think we see it as being a critical part of how we connect the dots for all the different disciplines.
Yeah, I agree. This is absolutely a transdisciplinary consideration. So moving forward, well, here again, Scott, if you're okay with it, I'd like you if we could just very quickly just touch on the process we use to narrow down our list of critical occupations. What I can say, and I've probably already said it on our last call, but one of our big eurekas in this whole process last year was we began with a list of occupations through doing the due diligence of looking at historical data and looking at BLS data and things of that nature. And we quickly realized that in order to meet the charge of this grant, looking at the most transformational socioeconomic trends and technologies, we needed to not begin with the occupations, but rather follow the competencies and the skills gaps that would lead us to the most critical occupations. And this process of comparing competencies at SCAG, which Kimberly, who's on the call, was very helpful in recommending and giving us access to information, and then APA resources via the transportation planning share I think helped get us closer. Scott, did you want to talk a little bit about this process?
Yeah, this sort of, and right, the fact that these are the top 5 planner competencies, that definitely needs explanation. But this whole analysis was designed to help us to better understand the workplace environment for planners in terms of what employers are looking for. So each set, we went through Kimberly's SCAG job listings, which was super valuable. And in analyzing that, tabulated all of the in-demand job competencies. So basically the job specs versus the expectations versus the positions and the salary ranges. And then did a very similar comparative study using APA's job listings to kind of bring it into a more national perspective. And you know, when it comes down to analyzing data, what we're looking at here is simply the top competencies that were most frequently listed in the collection of listings. Obviously, they're not the most critical competencies, or observationally, they're not the most critical competencies necessary for planners, but they are the ones that are consistently listed most frequently in job postings, which in itself is kind of interesting. So we've got a whole matrix of what these are and have used it to build a competency model for the Department of Labor that helps establish a standard within workforce that we can then go to workforce partners and show the mental work we've done in developing what planning competencies look like and the planning occupation looks like, in terms of now we can start the work of building pipelines. So it's been very critical and eye-opening work, I think, and we have much more data here that's presented in the final report, but this was kind of a synopsis of where the most frequent competencies laid out.
Agreed. Kimberly, did you want to share your thoughts on some of your comments on the research we did with SCAG job listings and thoughts on identifying future professionals in area schools and things of that nature?
Sure, yeah. It was great to connect a couple of months ago and just provide you guys all of our detailed job listings for SCAG's various planner classifications. So we have planners basically by grade in terms of, assistant planner, associate planner, senior planner, and upwards, but we also have planners according to topic area. And we have specific job listings for planners in, right now we have an announcement for intelligent transportation systems and transportation demand management. And of course we have the planner track that I fall under, which is the regional planner in data and GIS. And we're actually right now still collecting survey entries from our planners at SCAG. The deadline that we set for providing input would be this Friday, so just an FYI on that. You still might get some feedback from SCAG planners. Yeah, SCAG's planning positions, are unique in that we take a regional perspective, but we're also, as an MPO, the most agile in terms of technology adoption, because we do have the resources and we do have that, regional support. So I was happy to provide the information and can provide more input as needed.
Yeah, very, very much appreciated. It really helped us get a baseline understanding of where we needed to go, and that helped really inform our comparative analysis with APA. And as you can see here, this is through all of these efforts, the list that we've arrived at, and now we'll further refine with our survey input, which, by the way, has been very strong. We have, I think 148 responses so far, and it's encouraging, Kimberly, to hear that there could be more. My goal is to get us north of 200. This is respondents from Caltrans, SCAG, ESRI, HNTB, the American Planning Association announced the survey in their newsletter. It just went out. And with that kind of input, we can feel very confident that we've done all of the necessary due diligence to come up with a really strong list of critical occupations. And we've done a lot of the heavy lifting already to identify the competencies and transformational trends that need to be addressed. Tom, did you want to share your thoughts on just the process and where we are now before we go to the survey?
No, the only thing I was going to add for largely Kimberly's benefit is I presented the sort of the SCAG model just to talk about what we found when looking at a single agency's workforce needs at a meeting of the ITS joint cooperative, capacity building program in Virginia at the end of 2017. This again was an effort that focused on ITS workforce development and Volpe's role in steering that effort. But there were other MPOs in the room who found it very valuable. So if you have any interest in sort of being engaged in any of the Volpe or DOT efforts in the ITS area, I'm sure they would welcome additional guidance or participation. So we can have that conversation offline. But I found this exercise very useful and very informative. It's recognizing it's a standalone agency, and whether we can scale up findings is one question. But it does. It's another way for us to demonstrate what we perceive as being a shift toward a competency-based approach.
Sounds good.
Yeah, agreed, very much. Kevin, do you mind calling up the survey? We're going to try to jump over to our kind of a dashboard page that shows where we are with findings so far with the report. So if you just scroll down, you can see here that we have 148 responses. Scrolling down, that we were able to identify the number of who our audience of respondents are, what their job functions are primarily. We tried to capture additional comments wherever possible so that we've got qualitative feedback to augment what we're trying to quantify. And then just moving further down, we get to job titles, additional titles and responses, and let's go down to the critical occupations. We identify focuses, and then here we are. I think it's probably best to go to the percentages down below. Yeah, you can see here. This is the list that we just had on screen, and now we're validating that list via our survey, which is really the final step in getting our list honed in. And we can see that transportation analyst, transportation planner, of course, very high percentages, urban regional planners, environmental engineer rates pretty high, regional and environmental planner is quite high. And then going further down, we see that regional planner with a data GIS specialization is at 85%. So this really just drives home what we heard from all of you on the Discipline Working Group, giving us great guidance from the outset, from our outreach, from all of the educational and competency scans that Scott talked about. And we're getting to a point where we have a really definitive list that's bolstered by all the competencies and skills gaps that need to be addressed that Tom mentioned just a little while ago. Scott, Tom, did you want to talk about anything regarding the survey, or are we good to keep moving?
Well, for me, could you back up and show us the bar graph of the layout of the occupations?
Sure. Kevin, can you go back up to the bar graph and the layout of the occupations?
Because the appearance is that basically there are no outliers. I mean, generally from this analysis, all of the competencies rate fairly close to each, or all of the occupations were rated fairly close.
I agree. Yeah, it means our process. This is validating the process. So it's affirming.
Yeah. So good to know. And I'm glad to see we actually kept. Kimberly, I completely agree with your assessment that SCAG tends to be more agile in terms of technology adoption. We didn't find some of the competencies, some of the critical competencies like modeling, any of the other national listings. And so we kept in these 3 positions that were specific to what we found in SCAG, these regional planner positions with specialties in modeling and I forget what the other 2 were. But here clearly are, unless this is just all SCAG reporting, clearly they're fairly predominant in this in the survey outcome.
Agreed. So what I would like to request for any of you who think you might have a little bit, access to any respondents who could add value to the survey, please go ahead and send it out. If you've already done so and you feel like you've exhausted that, thank you for making this survey already very representative of what we need. But as I said, my goal is to get, I'd love to see us get north of 200 respondents. I think that'd be excellent.
Remind us how long are you keeping the survey open for?
We've got, I believe we have about another week. So if everybody could give this a good strong push, this week, that would be optimal. So let's go ahead and go back to the PowerPoint. Tom, did you want to add anything else on the survey?
No, I'm good.
Okay. So so thank you again to everybody who's distributed the survey. And then this is really...
Well, actually, Tyler, I take it back. I would be curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts on how the findings could be useful to them, because that might help us in how we actually present the materials of the final report, because we want them to be useful to an audience of practitioners.
I'd like a little bit more time, if possible, to go over the final report and provide feedback.
Fair enough.
Provide feedback on the survey, Kimberly?
On the final report that was sent out, I think it was earlier this week.
Okay, yeah. That's why we sent it, and we'll, whatever time you need, take it, and whenever we get it, we'll factor it in. This is while we have a report at the end of the year, we very much consider this as just a stop on a 2-year journey toward an end product. So it's iterative in nature. So whenever any of you have input, we welcome it. So this gets us to our career pathway template. With this, I'll say 2 things about this. One is Tom and Scott and I met with all of the directors involved in advancing the National Transportation Career Pathway Initiative throughout the country along the 5 disciplines of engineering, safety, environment, operations, and of course planning. And we listened to their feedback and reviewed a range of different templates, and finally came up with the template we have here, which enabled us to do a number of things. Number one, represent all of the critical KSAs, the critical academic, programmatic experience, work experience, recommended certifications, and job and wages as indicated in the headers at the top of this template. We wanted something that would show entry, intermediate, and advanced level occupations, which is of course noted along the far left. And also very important, we needed a model that would give the flexibility to us and to the other partners that we're leading as part of this initiative to demonstrate more of a ladder model that would be very integrated and vertically integrated, but also a lot of latticing, because as we all know, not every occupation is a swift climb up a ladder from point A to point B. A lot of times there's lateral movement and changes in focuses. There's different upskilling, retraining, and we arrived at this model, and I, for one, am happy with it. I think it's clear, easy to look at, and it gives our team and all of our other sub-partners the ability to reflect their research and findings in pathways that could be very linear, but also very latticed. Tom, do you want to talk a little bit about this? Maybe we have Scott then share his viewpoint.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say is that I recognize that there are limitations to traditional career pathway models, but we're looking for a bridge between what a lot of the audience for this report expects and something that takes us to something that's a little bit more dynamic. Maybe it might be a project or a skills-based effort. So this in my mind serves as a bridge between sort of a traditional Department of Labor model and something that tries to capture some of the dynamism. We've been looking at providing, at creating something that's an example of a project that requires a unique set of skills to complete, to demonstrate how transportation planning fits into to a broader agency or regional or discipline effort. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, and I think you guys covered it. I think, particularly for Jess, because he's in workforce, there needs to be an appreciation around this, that this first year has been a lot of discovery, not only in terms of what each of these disciplines look like, both from the perspective of their academic programs of study and what experiential training is available out there and how that's done, what the employment field looks like, and therefore defining the KSAs and the wages and the titles. There's been, and some of the disciplines are fairly ethereal in terms of being able to even identify what titles and what positions go to that. So we had to land on a career path template that allowed all of that early data to kind of coalesce into a first step. And from a planning perspective, planning is a very vertical career path. So this is the most simplest of the 5 disciplines, but this is the first chance that the entire NNTW team has had to be able to put all of this data onto one graphic and start to see what things are coming out as. I see this as a work in progress and very critical for our stakeholder presentation coming up with Federal Highway will be a better identification of who this type of graphic, who the career pathways are targeted for. Because I think that very much determines what details and what elaborations occur within something like this. So this right now, this is our first step, and I think over the course of the next year, we'll see these things developing, becoming a little bit more articulated.
I agree, Scott. This is, for me, it's just very gratifying to see it coming together now. We do a lot more work ahead of us, but we've got a process and a structure that I think will enable us to just capture insights from our working group today and moving forward, along with factoring in some of the validating evidence from our survey and so forth. So I'm eager to get to discussing the career pathway demonstration, but I think it's worth just touching on the report that we sent out and noting what everybody had a chance to look at. Kimberly, if you need more time, we get that you guys are very busy, and that's why we recruited everybody on this group. Is you're connected to so many things we need to learn about. But for my part, number one, I'd like to acknowledge Scott and Kevin Nargetta and then also Jacob Stern for the great work that they did on the report. Would not have been possible to secure this level of success to this point. And so thank you very much for all of that. This is a product as you've all seen, that involved a great deal of stakeholder engagement, the technology element, and everything else. And I'd like to get all of your feedback. I'm just getting a note from Jess Guerra. Jess, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
So you're going to have to jump off shortly, is that right?
I have to, probably in about 20 minutes, I do have to jump off.
Okay, so I'm just going to, what I'd like to do is just recommend that we want to hear feedback on the report, but Jess, I really want to make sure that we also acknowledge your great work on the demonstration. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll just save comments on the report that we sent out toward the end of today's call so that we can get input from Jess, which is foundational for our success in year 2. As everybody knows, we've been working from the outset to develop a demonstration program that satisfies the requirements of our year 2 deliverables. As the programmatic lead for this initiative, Tom and I and Scott, all agreed that we needed to demonstrate, to really be a pioneer, get out in front, and pilot a program that would test all of the research that we're doing, and then share that with our sub-partners so that they would be able to learn from our efforts. So the goal was to develop a transportation planning curriculum that addressed transformational technologies and trends in a meaningful way that offered new avenues or new access to career pathways in transportation planning in areas where those opportunities previously did not exist. And thank you, and thanks to the great work of Jess Guerra on call, a member of our group, along with Leticia Barajas, the Vice President over at LATTC, and our team. We've been able to find a way to make that happen in a time frame that most people would say was not even possible. So what we have here is a flyer that was actually our first attempt to get this class going. And as everybody on the call knows, anything worth doing is usually difficult and not always easy. And our goal was to offer a rich transportation planning curriculum with a lot of career pathway demonstrations and so forth within that class as part of a course offered at LATTC. Our first attempt at that proved problematic because we were coordinating with another community college, which we appreciated, and we found a faculty member who was a practitioner, works at the Los Angeles Department of Public Works, right near LATTC, and the time slot that we picked was problematic in recruiting students. And what ended up happening is something that has proven to be a great discovery from my standpoint. Jess and his team found a way to repurpose our efforts into a Saturday class, which was more accessible for LATTC students, and also to connect that with a group of co-enrolled students. Co-enrollment is a way to get self-selecting high school students to take classes for college credit, so they're co-enrolled. What's brilliant about this is from the outset, FHWA outlined that they wanted our career pathway efforts to focus on the post-secondary continuum. And as Jess and everybody on the call knows, a true career pathway has meaningful connections with beginning in K through 12, so that by the time you get to the post-secondary continuum, some portion of the heavy lifting has already taken place. By finding this population to take the course, which Jess, I'd like you to talk about in a second, we found a way to develop a complete career pathway connection beginning in K through 12 while satisfying all of the necessary requirements for our goals in this project by featuring the class in the post-secondary continuum, which of course then connects to 2-year to 4-year articulation and all of that. So with that, Jess, I'd like you to share your thoughts on where the class is now and what you see positive, and then I'd like to get input from everybody on the call on how we can define success for this course and then move that forward to make it an ongoing effort that can be templated elsewhere.
Sure. So, I think it's, as Tyler mentioned, we had, in our original plan, and I know that he showed the poster, which is, what he had up there, or still is on the screen, the GIS 25 course. We started it out, I believe, in the second week of the semester to give a little bit of time for recruitment. Tom was, gracious enough to come over and do an orientation piece to try to, get, that interest going. And we did find that the scheduling component was a little bit difficult. And, in terms of the days and times that the class was scheduled, it was at a date and time when the class actually competed with the major courses that some of our students were taking. So if they have to make a choice between taking, an extra class, even if it's degree, applicable and everything, versus getting some of their major classes out of the way, that's always going to be a challenge. But right now, as it stands, what we did is we actually moved it over and we focused on a different population, which is our K through 12. And with the concurrent enrollment students, the great part about it is our college has a pretty deep commitment to, the bringing in a new generation of entrants, not only into the transportation industry, but into many of the other industries that are represented by the programs that we have here on campus. So to kind of put things into perspective, our college has a concurrent enrollment of approximately about 1,100 students. So we have about 1,100 high school students that are concurrently enrolled at LATTC. That's significant because whereas your typical college, maybe concurrent enrollment makes 2% of the population of their total enrollment, we're more in the high single digits. We're in the 8th percentile, mark, more or less. So right now we have a class of 15 students. We saw this as an opportunity to pilot a couple of different things. One, being able to bring in that K through 12 and at the same time satisfy the requirements of the grant, because these are full-blown post-secondary students as well. But being able to capture them at an early stage, where we could potentially, channel these students right directly from this class into the continued work, and then maybe even into some of the programs that are out there, with a focus in careers in GIS. The other component that we actually piloted was, like we do in many of our concurrent enrollment type STEM classes, is that, we did open it up so to allow others to join the class. So we do have, within the group, we do have one college student, and we actually have a college professor that decided to take the class just out of how interesting the material looked and everything. So I think that, this is actually, really turning out to be, a very, very interesting pilot that's going to give us, some solid data in terms of the areas that we can build on and expand on for the GIS. It's also going to be able to provide, I think, 3 different perspectives, right? So we're going to be able to capture the perspective from the K through 12. We're going to be able to capture the perspective from a college student, and we're all going to be able to even capture the perspective from, a college, faculty. So, and this is a tenured, faculty. So it'll be kind of an interesting piece. So I think now we're at the point where we're, get together and schedule some of the guest lectures that we had discussed, that we originally had programmed for, when we were launching the class during the week. And I think to be able to make this a really interesting project for everyone.
I agree. Michael Shensky, I know that you have to leave shortly, and if you've got a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the co-enrollment, idea, what we're piloting, and from your standpoint, some of the most important things that we could perhaps draw from the pilot to apply to a more permanent offering, or in developing the course that you'd originally recommended, which was a course that would be count as for credit at the 4-year level. If you have a minute, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Otherwise, I can talk to you offline.
Yeah, no, definitely I can share my thoughts. And as I pointed out to you in that email earlier last week, I will have to be stepping off in just a minute because I do have a class that's about to start. But I think it's great to, also allow for high school students to be able to take the course to, show them what GIS is, and, even just put that on their radar, because, many students have no idea what GIS is until they actually become geography majors and, they're, well into the program. I mean, I personally didn't take my first GIS class until my last semester as an undergraduate, and really didn't have any exposure to it prior to that. So I think just, getting that information out there, letting students know, what GIS is, as well as exposing them, of course, to the field of transportation planning is great. Now, Jess, maybe you can weigh in. If a high school student takes the course, they then, is it the same as if a community college student is taking the course in terms of transferability?
Absolutely. Yeah, the units are fully transcribable, and the class continues to carry the same transferability as it would for a regular college student.
Yeah, that's great. That was the only, potential concern I had. But if these students have that, already taken, and then, they decide they, want to go into transportation career planning, or they want to learn more about GIS, they want to look at geography, they have the ability to do that, and it's going to count if they end up transferring down the road. So I think that's great.
Yeah, and, I know, Michael, I know that because we always have cohorts of GIS students at Cal State Long Beach on our team, they all often note that you were a critical instructor in getting them excited about GIS. But to your point with your own pathway, and it's what I'm hearing from a lot of the students who end up in GIS and planning, they almost didn't get a chance to learn about it because it came late, so much later in their academic career. So by front-ending it like this, I really feel like this accomplishes a lot of our goals. The fact that it's transferable is very very positive development. And Jess, of course, has already with his team built in GIS elements into the high school summer academy at LATTC. Now we've got a co-enrollment, which counts for credit. We've got also, of course, university or college students can take it, and we can take a lot of this feedback from the pilot to look into developing subsequent curriculum. So I think it all bodes very well. And should also mention that one of our affiliated centers of excellence has a community college partner out in Arizona, Pima Community College. And I was speaking with their director of workforce development prior to Jess's idea to offer the course in the way that it's now being offered. And that director of workforce development told me that they have a lot of very positive preliminary data that he expects to prove, conclusive soon, that the co-enrollment students, the co-enrolled students have much higher levels of retention and focus, and and it just reinforces the the best practices of career pathways, which is you got to get them excited in high school, and that just changes the trajectory of their pathway and their awareness and all of that. So I think that what we're piloting here at LATTC, the plugins with the Summer Academy, the transferable ideas that Michael has brought to the table, all of this is really, I think, a template for something that could be offered all around the country. And I think that my hunch is that this co-enrollment angle might be a very strategic and targeted way to create that linkage. Tom, do you have any thoughts on the class and the activities and what you shared in your session?
Yeah, so for me, it was, and Tyler will not be surprised to hear me say this, this process has been a lot about managing expectations for what we could accomplish in the course of a year. So from the beginning, I was sort of focused on the process, on how do you actually get programs in place, agreements, how do you deal with restrictions that might be tied to new curriculum approval. And so part of what we want to do is document that process that got us to this point, which, you know, required a lot of creativity and a leap of faith on some of our partners. The other thing I think we realistically want to do, particularly because we now have co-enrolled students, is what is their current level of awareness? We cannot track, we don't have the resources, at least at this point, to track the success of the career pathway model at getting people into planning programs or into the workforce, but we can demonstrate pre and post awareness of both GIS and transportation as career pathways about what they know and get information in front of the students. Our approach has been to sort of use GIS as the tool and contextualize it with transportation specific content, not only exercises, but also people who can demonstrate the career pathway in front of them. So to the extent that you can help us figure out what additional questions we might want to ask at the end of this exercise that would be useful to practitioners, I would love to hear that.
And this is an ongoing conversation, so, you know, we understand, you know, everybody doesn't always have an immediate thought, but we've developed an intake survey, which we'll follow up with on the students, but in the weeks ahead, we're going to want to define how we capture what they've learned and how we apply that moving forward. Scott, you've been involved in a number of pathway efforts. For your part, what do you see as top priorities for getting out of this class?
That's an excellent question. I don't know if I have an answer right off the bat either. I think because it's very much has to be contained within what we think is going into the class, and I'm not entirely sure of that. It would be nice if we were able to assess learning outcomes. You know, was the class effective in forming students, and was there retention of that? And Jess, I believe you've already said that assessments will be done. I don't know if you did a pre-assessment, but absolutely there's grading.
And part of the goal is to do a pre-assessment and to catch them early. So, you know, so we can compare, be able to generate some kind of learning gain at the end.
Yeah, and is that typical with, I assume, but is that typical with dual enrollment classes where you're dealing with high schoolers, is pre and post assessments?
Actually, it is. You know, it's interesting you question, because we had an introduction to hydrogen and fuel cell technology. And, you know, these students are really being held up to the same standard. The curriculum is not watered down in any kind of way or made easier. So we find that you know, the K-12 population we have typically will step up to the plate. Yeah, we definitely include every aspect of what we include in our regular trainings.
And these are your TWI students, is that correct?
These are really, TWI is coordinating this effort through LATTC, which is our home campus, if you will. But they are LATTC students. And in fact, actually, they're enrolled in the Los Angeles Community College District. So once they're approved for dual enrollment, they have to get approved by, you know, for each college they want to add from each one of their districts. Therefore, there's no difference between them and any other college student we have.
Agreed. I was wondering, did these recruits come from your Workforce Institute, or are they just or is it a wider audience?
The recruits come from the relationship. So the campus at LA Trade Tech has really, you know, in the last couple of years, you know, really done some very targeted outreach to many of the high schools and even middle schools that are not only that are really within our area. So these are not only surrounding, you know, from our surrounding communities here. There's students that we go as far down as Wilmington. You know, it's anywhere where it's still the service area of the LA Community College District. So it's a pretty wide net.
One thing from a practitioner perspective, SCAG just launched a new program called our Future Communities Initiative. This is a program where we're trying to get local jurisdictions and other public sector partners throughout the region to have more easy access to data and analytics and be able to basically use data as a means for making decisions, you know, to drive data-driven decisions. So for us, in this effort, we conducted a survey of our stakeholders from public agencies, and one of the things that we know they struggle with is not having the staffing resources or not having the staffing technical capabilities to dive deep into data and really understand what resources are available, and also understand, you know, what goes into the task of curating data so that it can be easily consumable by decision makers, by elected officials. So from that perspective, you know, we just launched a data science fellowship program where we're for our next fiscal year, we plan on placing well-qualified, you know, data students essentially in local jurisdictions who have a specific use case that they'd like assistance with, and any additional, you know, staffing support for people who are data literate at local jurisdictions is a goal of ours, whether it be sponsored through SCAG or through any other avenue. So we would be interested in any placements that happen, whether they be at the intern, technician, or planner level, that come out of the trade tech class. And just as a you know, as a means of addressing that resource, that staffing resource and wherewithal and know-how gap that we know is happening at several local jurisdictions throughout our region. So, and that transcends beyond just local jurisdictions. We'd also be interested in any public sector placements for staff or even, you know, interns who are well versed in GIS. Quick plug. We have our Story Maps Challenge competition coming up again this year. You guys know John Ho and Julia Brown, who have participated in this this effort through Cal State Long Beach. We're having that again. We are going to have a free GIS Story Maps training held at SCAG. So if there's any way we could maybe spread the word to you guys and get it connected to your students, that would be definitely really helpful on our end. And then finally, I've been looking at this application for the slide, Learning Activity GIS Story Map. And it looks like to be a freight-related crowdsourcing map. I would love to get any information on this, even if it's just a student activity. It looks pretty interesting.
Thank you, Kimberly. Well, if you have a minute, I know you're real busy, but I'd love to follow up with you on, you know, your idea of tracking and engagement with SCAG, and also, you know, we'd be more than happy to share the story map competition with this course. We've got, of course, a partnership with USC through our Metran Center of Excellence, so we could share it there. And then, of course, we'll look to have our team here at SWTWC with our Cal State Long Beach cohort submit again. Maybe go for a repeat. Managing expectations, of course, as Tom says, but Doesn't hurt to try.
That'd be great. Yeah.
And I love the idea of sort of connecting and looking at opportunities for students and the pilot to, you know, compete for some of the programs you just talked about, if eligible, because if nothing else, we can put on paper how this experiment matches the career pathway model that we've laid out, using GIS competencies as an on-ramp to it. So it's very exciting.
And then regarding
Yeah,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Kimberly, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's very congruent with what SCAG is doing right now. We're trying to get more staffing expertise at the local level with data and GIS. So anything we can do to complement that, you know, we're definitely in board.
As soon as we get off we wrap up today, I'll send you an email to set up a time to talk about how we can make that happen, Kimberly.
So,
And then, yeah, regarding what we have here, this is an example of one of I'm calling it co-curriculum. I feel like when you want to develop a career pathway curriculum, you're looking to the future, you're identifying skills gaps, you're addressing transformational technologies and different trends. And in an ideal world, you have the authority to just develop a new class on the fly and offer it that directly targets something. We all know that those realities are very, that possibility is often not possible because classes are compacted. It takes several years to offer a new course. In many cases, by the time that course has been developed, the technology has already changed again. And I really like what we're developing here with LATTC, which is building a co-curriculum on top of the scaffolding of an existing course that's more nimble and can be adapted. So what we've done is we've developed a story map that surrounds LATTC that identifies different trip generators, all the different modes of transportation, so that the students can right off the bat visualize their own mobility realities and then get a sense of how they will soon, as part of a class project, do a walk audit right on and outside of campus to identify different modes of transportation and then look to actually document the ways in which active transportation may not be compatible with freight and all of the other modes. For example, something else we're going to do in partnership with Christine, who's teaching the course, is have the students develop their own mobility, a story map that demonstrates their own mobility options getting to and from LATTC. And in a map that we're developing right now, we have a hypothetical example of a student trying to get from Boyle Heights to LATTC, and we show what walking there would look like, what biking there would look like, what taking the bus would look like, light rail, all of those, and then of course commuting. And this, I think, is just another opportunity to help students see the future of transportation and planning and understand the new role of data, which is on the front end, not the back end. Data is no longer a retrospective consideration. It's something that you can gather on the front end and inform your planning processes. So I'm very excited about it. I think that it's something that has taken root thanks to Jess and his team being nimble and all of the great input from everybody here in our group. And we're now, in the process of learning from this and then continuing on. So this is an expanded look at the story map that we're developing for the course. Students are going to be able to see all of the different modes of transportation, bus stops, metro rail lines, and things like that. Tom, did you want to talk about the co-curriculum idea, or shall we continue on?
No, I think it's fine. I think this is a model we want to test moving forward, so we can actually gather some data beyond this particular class. But the only thing I want to add is that part of the idea of the co-curriculum is not just about transportation-specific issues, but making career pathway development and guidance part of that curricular experience, so that that is embedded in the class as well, and that the resources we bring to bear through the course involve people who can talk about transitioning to four-year institutions, directly to the workplace, get exposure to the types of programs and competitions that Kimberly was talking about. And the last thing I'll add is that we do see this as an opportunity to demonstrate what we've done with Federal Highway Administration, and we're hoping that the Director of the Workforce Development Unit, Ginny Sue, will at some point be able to come out near the end of the class, particularly as the students are doing the walk audit using the tool that Tyler just showed you, so that we can get the attention of the people who are funding this effort, so that we can hopefully bring more resources to do it at a greater scale and with more partners.
I'm curious, Terry, you're of course aware of all things Esri and GIS. Are there other, as you look at this and hear about what we're doing, are there other efforts like this that you know of underway? How novel of an effort is this? And do you have any thoughts on things that we could incorporate to just make it that much stronger?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of similar efforts that are really focused on kind of the transportation workforce. We internally have an effort really to encourage GIS literally from any level, K through 12, and we do have courses. We've donated free software across the country. What we have found is that at the high school level and below, it really does require an internal champion, someone who's really going to take ownership and has a bit of passion about it. And so every year at our user conference, we actually have a group of students get up and really show their work. And it's probably, from my mind, it's probably the most inspiring and the part of our user conference that I enjoy the most, because we've had actually a group of fourth graders that a professor at the University of Washington actually worked with one of the local grade schools and recruited these fourth graders to go out and do her field research, looking for a particular type of species under rocks, and these kids were just, they loved it, and they would go out every day with a little, collector and bring it back in the morning and upload their data, and they just so then we had them up on our main stage in front of 15,000 people, and literally they got like a 2-minute standing ovation. So everything from fourth graders, we've had high school students that have really did sort of path-breaking environmental projects that really did change their complete career trajectories. So I do like this notion of kind of how to the having both sort of junior college and high school students, and I think it's a great idea. And again, it's when people get it, they become very passionate about it, and it's when they can see something that gives them an opportunity to sort of work with technology in this way, they become very very passionate and very energized about it. So I think that's great.
Excellent. So we'll continue seeing this through. We'll have another opportunity to in our next quarterly meeting to talk further about this. And as these products are developed, we can send them out to the group to take a look and interact with them. So, Tom, I know that one of your priorities for the call was to really get a strong amount of feedback on from the group on how to make this course as successful as possible. I've got some ideas for industry speakers who can come to the class. We've heard already from Kimberly that there's some ways we can connect with SCAG, also share the story map competition. Do you have any other thoughts, to pose to the group, just to ensure that we're leaving no rock unturned on making this as targeted and specific as possible?
Yeah, no, I think this feedback is good. I've been interested in how do we define success for this effort? And it's been clear in my mind for the process piece and addressing the institutional challenges. With the co-enrollment, I want to be realistic about what we can expect in terms of successful outcomes. So as people think about this, if you have any other thoughts you want to share with us, shoot an email or set up a call. That's value added to me. We put on paper how this process came about, which could become a model addressing some of the financial, the funding constraints, the institutional coordination, articulation. That to me is already success. But if there's something that we can do to connect to the workforce and how you define the successful outcome of a training program for somebody you want to hire, that's the stuff that we could use feedback on.
So,
Tyler, before we move on, Tom, I know one of your priorities too was to figure out how we can help tell the story about the demo program.
Yeah, I mean, I've reached out to the American Planning Association, the editors for Planning Magazine, to try to see if they would do a feature write-up on the effort. But if there's other outlets, whether it's on the GIS side or other places where you think we could pitch a story, we've got a team in place that we could work on the talking points and craft some of that story. I'd welcome that as well. And Scott, thanks for reminding me.
So this is Terry. We have pretty strong relationships with government and government technology and GovLoop, and both of those we could try to pitch the story to them if that would be useful to you. And basically, we would just kind of connect them to you if that would be of interest. That's more on the technology.
That would be great.
Okay.
Terry, do you see that as a text treatment, or do you see that as, how is that typically done? Video?
No, they're articles basically, and
okay.
Digital and hard copy publications that are really read by technologists, IT folks and CIOs, and I think it's an important story that kind of how do we sort of recruit technology, sort of kids interested in technology into these different professions. So I think there would be interest on their part, and they really try to do kind of leading case examples. So I would put this in that category.
Yeah, that's great news, and we'll definitely take you up on that.
Okay.
Thank you. So this brings us to upcoming priorities, what we're looking to, in this year ahead. Scott, did you want to take this one?
Sure. Just a heads up that the final report was sort of one half of our first year product for Federal Highway. The second half is to stand before them and present the outcomes a little bit more informally. And I think it's an opportunity for the NNTW, the 5 regional centers, to get a good understanding of, is this the right direction to be on? Are we headed in the right direction for year 2? And are we coming up with outcomes that are going to move the federal highway, strategic goals forward. Tom is going to be our emissary in DC for that presentation. And most of it's going to be just remote and amongst the 5 workforce centers, but we'll definitely report out and give you an update as to how that went and what changes or any unexpected outcomes that might have surfaced due to that. So that's coming up on March 16th, and that's kind of an exciting breakpoint for us. And then really this year 2, starting in January, but really starting March 16th is when we switch from the discovery phase to the implementation phase, you might say. The first year has been very much about getting a good understanding of the planning discipline in terms of its occupational priorities. And therefore, I'd just like to touch back and say that those of you who are interested or committed to reading the final report, at least the first 36 pages are critical to planning. And I recommend you be bold in your feedback. It's easy as deadlines loom to get, curled up in a dark room and get this stuff written out and put out in somewhat of a vacuum, trying to remember and collate as much of the information that you guys have provided as possible. But be bold in your feedback. Did we miss some important points about the planning occupation, or did we mischaracterize it? That would be very useful feedback, particularly as we go and stand before Federal Highway to present this information out. But phase 2 is looking at industry partners, you guys, and whatever academic partners make sense in looking at how to implement. And the Southwest has already begun this process through the demonstration program, but each of the centers are looking to establish sort of partners who have a cooperative incentive to move forward with developing implementation pipelines that will build out these transportation career opportunities. And so that's the work that's in year 2, and we're going to figure out how to put together a set of plans that would help these partners, these mostly academic and technical school partners, take the data, the research that we've done, and start to build out these courses or these programs at their own institutions. We need to look at the analysis of the survey results as that closes out and figure out what follow-up survey need to be identified. That was definitely our first shot at surveying the questions we had about planning, and there's many, many more, and I think that those will be directed by what we find out from the survey analysis of this first shot. And then a question I have is in your minds, where does this initiative lead? If we look beyond year 2, beyond just the deliverables to our funders, where do you see this effort being productive and helpful to the local economy, to your specific organizations, to workforce in this area? Maybe bring that message to Federal Highway on March 16th in a way that we get good value and some good momentum to continue to carry this initiative beyond year 2 in a way that actually is productive to the economy.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's a good overview, and we've accomplished a lot over the last year, and we've got a lot to do moving forward. We're certainly moving into an implementation phase, which will be instructive for our efforts beyond year 2, as well as all of our sub-partners all around the country. And what I'd like to do, I guess, in the quarter ahead is, number 1, follow up with all the great ideas we've heard to infuse value and just make this demo that much more effective. As I mentioned previously, if anybody's got any sense that they could do a final push to get additional survey respondents, that would be great. And I guess I'd like to just open it up to folks on the call right now. If you have any final thoughts on follow-ups on the survey or moving beyond year 2, we're all ears. I realize we've already gotten a lot of feedback throughout the call, so it might be that we're good. We'll be following up regardless anyway, but any concluding thoughts or anything that maybe Tom, Scott, or I didn't have the wherewithal to ask that you've been thinking about in regard to this effort, let us know.
Okay. Tom, this is Terry. I was hesitant to, I wasn't sure who to send the survey to. I didn't want to have it heavily slanted towards GIS, but I'll actually send it out to the planning directors at a number of the state DOTs, and we'll see if we can't get them to have their staffs fill it out for you.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Terry. And I'll also, for another thing to follow up on as we look to identify slots for guest speakers and so forth, I'll reach out to members of the team on that in that regard as well. Tom, did you have anything else before we come to a close?
No, I just, as everybody can tell, this work is being driven with a lot of time and effort by Tyler, Scott, Kevin, and Jacob, and a host of others. So, I want to thank them, and as well as thanking you all again for your commitment. I think we've actually done more than I thought we might be able to accomplish. We're not done yet, but it's all come together, and you've all played a very critical role. So thank you.
All right, and I think that brings us to a close. So look for individual follow-ups from our team here, and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
All right, thanks.